December 1944. Snow buried the Ardennes forest under a silent white blanket, broken only by the distant thud of artillery and the crack of rifles echoing through the trees. For the American soldiers dug into the frozen earth, this was supposed to be a quiet sector. Instead, it became the opening stage of Germany's last great gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. Private First Class Audie Murphy, barely 19 years old, stood at the edge of a battered tree line near the village of Holzwehr, France. He was small, thin, and looked younger than most of the men he commanded. Yet rank no longer mattered here. Murphy was the senior surviving leader on the ground, and the enemy was coming. German infantry moved through the fog in disciplined waves, supported by tanks grinding forward through the snow. Their objective was simple: punch through American lines, seize the road, and keep the offensive alive. The defenders were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Murphy's unit had already taken heavy casualties. Men lay wounded in shallow foxholes. Ammunition was low. Radios crackled with chaos. Then came the order over the line withdraw immediately. For most soldiers, retreat would have been survival. The Germans had numbers. They had momentum. And they had armor. Murphy looked back at his men. If they pulled out now, the German advance would roll straight through the gap. Tanks would overrun the road. Artillery would follow. The entire flank could collapse. He made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Murphy ordered his men to fall back without him. Confused voices protested, but he cut them off. Someone had to stay behind. Someone had to slow the advance. Someone had to make the enemy believe the position was still defended. Murphy limped forward through the snow toward a burning American tank destroyer that had been knocked out moments earlier. Flames climbed into the winter sky, and ammunition inside the wreck detonated sporadically. It was a death trap. He climbed onto it anyway. German soldiers spotted him almost immediately. Bullets tore into the wrecked vehicle. Shrapnel ripped through the air. Murphy ignored it all. He swung the mounted .50 caliber machine gun toward the advancing infantry and opened fire. The gun roared. Tracers slashed through the fog, cutting down the lead elements of the German assault. Murphy fired in controlled bursts, sweeping left to right, forcing the enemy to scatter for cover. German officers shouted orders, trying to reorganize their men under fire they had not expected. From the German perspective, this wasn't one-man die. It felt like a full defensive position. Mortar rounds began falling around him. Snow erupted in violent plumes. The tank destroyer rocked under the impact of near misses. Still, Murphy kept firing. He adjusted for distance. He watched the enemy movements. He fired again. Minutes passed. Then more German infantry attempted to flank him. Murphy pivoted the gun and raked their advance. Bodies fell. Survivors crawled back into the tree line. The German attack stalled not because it lacked numbers, but because it could not identify where the American defense actually was. Murphy was bleeding. Shrapnel had torn into his leg earlier, but adrenaline masked the pain. His hands were numb from the cold and recoil. Smoke burned his eyes. The tank destroyer beneath him burned hotter with every second. Still, he refused to retreat. When the machine gun overheated, Murphy paused only long enough to fire his rifle. When German tanks crept closer, he called in artillery strikes on his own position, adjusting fire by radio while exposed in the open. Shells screamed down around him. The forest shook. German units hesitated. Commanders reassessed. Time slipped away, and time was exactly what Murphy was buying. Behind him, American forces regrouped. Defensive lines were formed. The German advance lost its momentum, not because it was defeated outright, but because one soldier refused to give ground. As the smoke thickened, and the fire consumed the wreck beneath him, Murphy finally leapt down and limped back toward friendly lines. He had held the line alone, and the battle was far from over. Asterisk. The Germans did not retreat in panic. They pulled back with discipline. From the tree line, German officers studied the smoking wreck and the churned snowfield in front of it. Bodies lay scattered, where moments earlier infantry had advanced confidently. What had stopped them wasn't clear, but it was enough to force caution. To the German commanders. This did not look like the work of one man. It looked like a hidden American strongpoint. They assumed machine guns, mortar, possibly multiple squads dug in beyond the smoke. Their intelligence had already underestimated American resistance in this sector. And now they paid the price for that mistake with time they could not afford to lose. While German officers reorganized their companies, Murphy staggered back to friendly lines. His leg burned. Blood soaked into his boot. He was barely able to stand. Medics tried to pull him farther to the rear. Murphy refused. He grabbed a field telephone and began directing his men who were shocked to see him alive. He repositioned squads, placed riflemen along the road, and directed machine guns into overlapping fields of fire. The hill was no longer empty. It was ready. When the Germans attacked again, it was with renewed force. Infantry advanced under covering fire, moving carefully this time. Tanks crept forward behind them, cannon sweeping the forest edge. Mortar pounded American positions. Chewing up snow and soil, Murphy moved through the line despite his wound, shouting orders, steadying shaken soldiers, pointing out targets through the smoke. He had already faced death once that day. Fear had no leverage left. The German infantry reached the American perimeter. That was their mistake. American. Rifles erupted. Machine guns opened up from concealed positions. Mortar rounds slammed into advancing formations. What had looked like a weakened line suddenly exploded with coordinated fire. Murphy picked up a dropped radio and began calling artillery again. This time, it was precise. Shells landed just ahead of the German tanks, forcing them to halt. Infantry scattered. Officers shouted commands that dissolved into chaos under the thunder of explosions. The attack faltered. Then broke. German units withdrew for the second time. Now the realization began to spread. Through their ranks, the Americans here were not broken. They had been tested and had held. For Murphy's men, the psychological shift was immediate. Hours earlier, they had been on the edge of collapse. Now, they stood taller in their foxholes. They had seen what one determined stand could do. Murphy finally allowed himself to sit. Only then did the pain catch up. His leg wound was serious. Shrapnel had torn muscle and flesh. Shock crept in as the adrenaline faded. Medics insisted again, this time successfully, that he be evacuated. As he was carried away. Murphy looked back at the hill. It was still American. Behind the lines, German commanders faced an uncomfortable truth. Their advance had been slowed by a force that should not have been able to resist. The timetable slipped. Supporting units were delayed. The momentum of the larger offensive began to fray at the edges. No report would ever fully capture what had happened. But not the cold, not the smoke, not the moment when a single soldier chose defiance over survival. But the results were undeniable. The road remained closed. The hill remained held. And the German advance in that sector never fully recovered. Murphy would later be awarded the Medal of Honor, though no citation could truly explain what it meant to refuse retreat. When retreat was the rational choice, the war would continue. The bulge would rage on, but on that frozen slope near Holtzwehr, one truth became permanent. Sometimes a line holds not because it is strong, but because someone refuses to let it fall. Audie Murphy awoke in a field hospital hours later. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. His leg had been badly torn by shrapnel, and doctors moved quickly to stabilize him. They expected anger, frustration, or exhaustion. Instead, Murphy asked one question: "Did we hold?" When the answer came yes, he closed his eyes and let himself rest. The hill near Holtzwehr never fell. In the days that followed. German units attempted to probe the sector again, but the moment had passed. American reinforcements arrived. Artillery strengthened the line. The Germans shifted their efforts elsewhere. Seeking easier ground. What had begun as a weak point became a dead end. For Murphy's men, the memory never faded. They spoke of the moment the tank burned, of the radio crackling with artillery fire called in so close it shook the earth beneath their boots, of the sight of a single figure standing alone where no one should have been able to stand. They had seen courage stripped of speeches, stripped of ceremony. Just action. Murphy himself never spoke of it pride. When pressed later, he deflected or minimized what happened. He insisted he had only done what was necessary to protect his men, that it hadn't felt heroic, that it had felt inevitable. That was the part most people never understood. Heroism, for Murphy, wasn't a decision. It was the refusal to abandon others. The Medal of Honor. Citation would later describe his actions in formal language. Enemy tanks. Advancing infantry, wounded but resolute. It listed facts and movements and outcomes. It could not capture the silence. Before the first shot. It could not capture the knowledge. That retreat was the logical choice, and the choice he rejected. Murphy left the war as the most decorated American soldier of World War II. But the war never left him. Nightmares followed. Guilt followed. The weight of survival pressed harder than the memory of battle. He carried the faces of fallen friends long after the snow had melted from that hill in France. When he later spoke to younger soldiers, he never glorified combat. He warned them. He reminded them that courage had a cost that lingered long after. Medals were pinned to uniforms. Yet the legacy of that day endured. Military. Historians would later point to Holtzwehr as a textbook example of how individual resolve can shape the battlefield, how leadership under fire can reverse collapse, how morale once broken can be restored by a single, undeniable act. But beyond doctrine and analysis, there was something simpler. The hill held because someone decided it. Would. No order demanded it. No reinforcement promised it. No strategy guaranteed success. Only one man, wounded and outnumbered, refused to step aside. In war, lines are drawn on maps. In reality, they are drawn in moments like that. Moments when fear is acknowledged and ignored. When retreat is possible and rejected. When the difference between collapse and survival is not firepower. But Audie Murphy did not stop the war. He did not change its outcome. But on that frozen day, he proved something timeless. That a single soldier, standing alone, can hold back more than an enemy. He can hold back despair. He can hold back defeat. He can hold the line